Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm Armstrong Williams. New youth crime laws are set to take effect on this Friday, November 1st. Fox 45's Rebecca Pryor has a closer look at those new laws.
Starting November 1st, consequences for young offenders more likely in some cases. The recent rise in juvenile crime,
Bill 381,
causing Governor Wes Moore to put down his pen, signing a new Juvenile Justice Reform Act into law. Included in the legislation, children between the ages of 10 and 12 will now face charges for handgun violations, third-degree sex offense, aggravated animal abuse, and if a child under 13 steals a car for the first time, the child in need of supervision or SINS petition will be filed. And in this case, where the accused offender is already 13, law enforcement required to keep a detailed record of the arrest, and the length of any given probation could extend beyond the current 6-month maximum.
Is it important to have longer probation so that there's more supervision? Yeah, in theory, that is what I think makes sense.
But in reality, local attorney Warren Alperstein claiming the majority of juvenile cases he's seeing firsthand never make it that far.
When a juvenile commits a crime, they get arrested, they get released right back out onto the street. And that's the problem. And there's nothing in this new law that's going to really prevent that from happening.
I can't speak about a specific case.
The 13-year-old was arrested in Anne Arundel County State's Attorney Ann Leitis's jurisdiction.
We don't think it goes far enough in that the Department of Juvenile Services has to be the one to react and to implement the laws.
Echoing Alperstein's concerns, Leitis arguing just because teens will once again be charged with certain crimes, consequences still not guaranteed.
So depending on what happens to a young person charged with a violent crime, it's really going to be the response of juvenile services that's going to matter.
Making real change also and uncertainty.
But they've given the Department of Juvenile Services the tools that they need, right? And they've sent a message saying we need more. We need more for these kids.
Rebecca Pryor, Fox 45 News.
You know, joining us is the Honorable Ivan Bates, Baltimore City State's Attorney. You know, it's fascinating listening to the package. And I know that Governor Wes Moore, along with you're the architects that fought hard with the legislature to get this passed, something that Hogan was not able to do, basically because he was a Republican. It's just a fact. You take issue with anything that you heard in the package?
No, I mean, I understand, you know, those are my colleagues.
So you agree with their facts?
Well, some of them, in the sense that could we have gone farther? Yes, there are things we wanted to. But, you know, anytime you're trying to come up with an agreement, remember, some legislatures didn't want this at all. Mm-hmm. There were some that wanted to go a little further. I would have liked to have gone a little further. However, we came, when I say we, we're led by the governor, and without a doubt, we would not have achieved this change within juvenile law if it had not been for the leadership of the governor, as well as the leadership of the House and the Senate. And together, they were able to get the votes needed. But you give a little here, get a little there, but there are some things that are really big and strong here with this. Number one, each and every single felony, DJS must refer to our offices. That's something that wasn't happening before. So meaning prosecutors, we have a little more say in what's going on. Also, anytime a police officer requests that a young person be detained, and if DJS doesn't do that, then that young person's case must be given to our office, the prosecutors, within 2 days. That's something that definitely wasn't happening. And why is that important? So one of the things that was causing problems was that time period it was taking for cases to go from DJS to our office, meaning the prosecutors. The old law said at least 25 days, but it was not necessarily quote unquote written in stone. It would sometimes take 25, 50, 60, 80 days, 90 days. Sometimes we never would get a number of these felony cases. Now, when the police officers say that an individual should be detained, it's 2 days, and any other case, it's 15 days that these cases must be given to our office. And that's extremely important. The data clearly shows, and the experts say, to hold young people accountable, 2 things must happen. It must be swift and certain consequences. Getting us cases within 2 days allows us to be a little more swift. and allows us to now reach out to victims and witnesses to put together strong cases so that now we can give those certain consequences.
What do you see are the biggest challenges that you anticipate in implementing the new law?
It's going to be a little difficult, I think, at the beginning for everybody. One, my office, we need more people power. We've had to hire more individuals to do charging. Some of the cases that would drag out, now we have to have a quicker turnaround. We also need to make sure that we've trained the police on which cases to request that young people be detained. And DJS now needs to make sure that they're able to push the cases to our office a little more quickly. What this law also does, now there's a committee or a review board that's monitoring what's going on with DJS. So they're not just operating in a silo with no accountability.
How do you envision it improving outcomes for Baltimore's youth and communities? And then also, what are the other challenges that the law does not address?
Well, the whole purpose of the juvenile system is rehabilitation. You cannot have rehabilitation if young people are not held accountable and if young people are not given that opportunity within the juvenile justice system. To now have young people in the system a little more quickly so that we know who they are. They're not basically saying the officers taking them home. They go home and then before you know it, 2-3 days later, they're back out committing the same offense. Then it's a revolving door. What this hopes to do is to stop that revolving door, to place that young person the first time under the care and custody of DJS so we know what's going on. Then we can send those young people to probation, while they're on probation, to the programs that they need for rehabilitation. Before, under the old law, 6 months for a misdemeanor. A handgun, where carrying and transport a handgun's a misdemeanor. They would potentially be on probation, supervised release, for 6 months. Now it's a minimum that we're looking at a year. And we can now extend it if we need to allow that young person to get the program and to get to go through the probationary and to get the rehabilitative programs that they need to help them.
Let me give you an outlandish scenario. A mother's out walking her dog, and all of a sudden, the dog breaks loose and viciously attacks someone, and the person dies. That mother would be held accountable and responsible for the conduct of her animal.
Yes.
But if a young person goes out, 12 years old, 9 years old, and kills someone viciously, then the accountability becomes quite different.
It does.
Why?
Got to talk to the legislature on that one. But to me, one of the things we need to talk about with juvenile justice is parental accountability. And that's one of the things this law really doesn't address. And so when I listen to my colleagues and listen to other attorneys, that's one of the pieces I would love to see addressed. Because there's two things going on with parental accountability. One, there are those parents who, no matter what happens, they could care less what their children are going to do. Doesn't matter what age they are, they're just not engaged to being a parent. Those are the parents I'm looking at. But what about the parent and I've heard this time and time again, we have so many truancy issues in Baltimore City. We have a truancy court. In a truancy court, when you sit there, you listen to the stories of so many parents. And I was in there listening probably about a month and a half ago. And one of the stories that I was able to find out about was that there was a mother where her daughter had just left. She didn't know where her daughter was. She was 15. She had run out in the streets and she's gone. And she's been asking the system time and time again for help. And that is where I want to see the law also try to support parents, because there are parents who are trying. But there are parents whose children, they want no accountability. And too many times you hear the stories of mothers going to DJS, asking for help, and they're saying there's nothing we can do because your child is in the system. Well, do we want that? We want to help this parent. We want to help this child. And we're telling this parent there's nothing we can do unless your child is in the system. So what is that saying? You have one group that's saying, we don't want anybody in the system, but then you have a mother who's saying, I've done all I can, I need help. And so what we need to do is find a way within the law to make sure we hold parents accountable, but we also give parents who have lost all hope in helping their children, we give them the support that they need.
There's no question that in this new system, the governor's Secretary of Juvenile Services, Vince Giraldi, plays a critical role. And in certain language, he would be known as the gatekeeper. Can you explain its responsibility as the gatekeeper for juveniles entering the justice system and how critical it is that he does his job moving forward under these new laws?
Well, you know, when you look at the system, the juvenile system, before 2022, you had it where, like the adult criminal justice system, the police would make an arrest, they would take them down to central booking in Baltimore City, and my office would look, talk to the police, look at the report, and then charge that individual. And we're the gatekeepers, meaning the prosecutors are the gatekeepers in the adult system. On the juvenile system, prior to 2022, that's how it was. After 2022, they scraped that and said, we're not going to do that. We're going to give all the power to the secretary and to DJS, meaning that the police make an arrest. That individual doesn't come to the prosecutor's office. That individual is taken down to the Baltimore City Juvenile Justice Center. Now, one of the things that DJS has done is in Baltimore City, after 3 o'clock, they're no longer at the Baltimore City Juvenile Justice Center. They now are at their headquarters. So now the police must make a telephone call to explain to the individual at DJS what are the issues with this young person they've arrested. DJS, and they're not lawyers, they're not trained lawyers, they now make the decision what, if anything, this young person is to potentially be charged with, and what should we do with this young person? They make the decision if this young person should be detained, if this young person should just be sent home on electronic home detention.
Haven't they made decisions recently where their decisions have cost people their lives?
They've made a number of decisions, I think, that are up for debate. And, you know, I want to sit down and say that they've made decisions that have been very troubling.
Deadly, I would say.
And you say that, yes, in some ways they have been.
For anyone loved one
who's lost their loved one, yes.
They would say deadly.
Yes,
and
they
painful.
would say that.
This Baltimore City State Attorney Ivan Bates is our guest. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. And welcome back. It is such an honor, and we're so grateful to have you in our broadcast house tonight. Based on everything that we've discussed to this point, I want to bring this conversation closer to the person on the street that lives this every day. And your response will be in how the law that will become the law on November 1st will impact this rapid response. And this is called What Happens Under These Circumstances. A juvenile steals a car in a nonviolent manner.
Well, first, it depends on the age of the juvenile. Let's say the juvenile is 14. What happens if that officer sees this juvenile and says he's been in a car, stolen car 2-3 times, the officer checks that this juvenile should be detained. DJS at that moment in time will probably not detain that young person. However, within 2 days, we should have that report. Once we have that report within 2 days, we then have the opportunity to reach out to that witness or that victim as quickly as possible to get them on board so we can now begin the process of holding that young person accountable a little more quickly.
A juvenile approaches a car with the owner standing on the other side of the car on the sidewalk.
And steals the car?
Attempting to steal the car.
Well, the problem I have is that under the statistics, that's only called a theft or maybe a robbery, not a carjacking.
You said you have a problem with that, though.
Well, I do, but the way the law is, we don't have any say on that because that's how the charging will be based on the police making that
So
charge.
the owner is powerless in that situation.
Well, the owner is not powerless in the sense that young person will still be charged accordingly.
But there's nothing he could do but stand there and watch his transportation, his disruption of life, just totally
1,000.
helpless.
Unfortunately, that's the case.
So
with that being the case, we hope that officer is able to arrest that young person, charge that young person. I would personally view that as a carjacking, but it's not necessarily viewed as a carjacking. It's probably going to be viewed as a robbery. If that's the case, the officer then would once again request that young person be detained. More than likely, what we've seen in the past, DJS would not detain that young person. They may give them electronic home detention. And then once again, within 2 days, my office would have that case. We'd reach out to that victim as quickly as possible to get their information.
So 48 hours is the magic here.
48 hours. The key here is that the police, and they're playing a big role in this process now. Every time they mark down this young person should be detained, and if DJS does not detain them, then they have to give us the paperwork within 48 hours.
Another scenario, a juvenile approaches a car and verbally threatens the owner of the car and then steals the car.
If the owner is sitting in the car when this happens, now
Yes.
that would be viewed as a carjacking because the owner is physically in the car. Now the juvenile's gotten them out. With that being a carjacking and the police arrest them, at that moment in time, they ask DJS to detain them. And that may be a case, depending on the juvenile's background and history, that may be a case that DJS detains, especially if a handgun was used. If a handgun wasn't.
Stop there. So a juvenile approaches a car, gun in hand, owner of the car on the sidewalk, and steals the car.
It's an armed robbery, and then we would once again, within 24 hours, that officer, because every single one of these cases, I feel after talking to the police, they're going to be asking for detention. Then it's incumbent upon DJS what happens. Technically, they're still the gatekeepers at the initial stage. However, we've moved a step closer to being able to help and to support the victims in this process.
So a juvenile with an ankle bracelet is outside of his supposed domain.
And did they do a crime?
Yes.
Stealing a car.
Yes.
It's still a car. This would be their second felony. And under their new policy, this second felony, the young person having the ankle bracelet, that young person should be detained without the officer asking.
Should be or will be?
According to DJS, they will be detained. I feel I want to go ahead and see what happens. And once again, my whole focus is ensuring that we protect
Are
and
you
support
concerned
the
that
victims.
DJS will not follow the letter of the law, skirt the law?
Well, Secretary Schiraldi said he works at the behest of the governor. He does what the governor wants. This was the legislation that the governor and the leadership of both the House and the Senate said they wanted. So I'm going to sit here and say, at this moment in time, like I said before, I know who Secretary Schiraldi reports to. He says he follows what the governor's mandate is and his policy with this law has been to hold young people accountable. And when situations like this and changing the policy, you said you will detain them, so I believe he'll detain them.
Okay. A juvenile with multiple interactions with law enforcement with an ankle bracelet proceeds outside his allotted sphere of influence.
Does he do any crimes?
Yes.
Doing a crime and he has a significant history, if it is a felony, then once again, DJS, based on the new policy, is supposed to detain that young person.
Well, what if he does no crime, but he's outside of his allotted sphere?
Then that would be a violation to the judge. And then the judge hopefully will have the opportunity to say you violated. Now, DJS the first time is going to probably not really want to report that. However, my reading and interpretation of laws, any and every time, because remember, one of the things that we were able to get in the law at the last second was something that we asked for, meaning my office, that said if a juvenile is on electronic home detention, they violate that. We must know within 24 hours. So now we will know, so my office will at least let the court know, because the court must know as well, to hold that young person accountable, because clearly they don't want to listen to the rules. Now, it depends whether it was a 5-minute, I walked up the street, 5 minutes, checked the mail, or it was, I was gone for 3 days and I came back. That really depends on all of that in terms of what the violation looks like, because once again, that's not my decision. That'll be the decision of the court, the judge.
A juvenile is arrested for rape.
What happens with that case? Without a doubt, that officer will request that they be detained, and I've seen that DJS will detain those types of individuals.
Let's say a juvenile is arrested for shoplifting, because this is a big deal here in Baltimore.
It is a big deal.
And these are the kinds of crimes and scenarios that really hit home at everyday Baltimoreans.
They do.
So juvenile shoplifts.
Well, because it's a theft less than most likely.
$1,000?
Yes.
$800?
$800. The magic number, I believe, is $1,500. Because a theft less than $1,500 will be viewed as a misdemeanor. The officer may or may not be called. DJS may or may not ever forward that case to our office because it's a misdemeanor. So my office may never know anything about it. Once again, DJS is the gatekeeper of the system. And we talk about what we would like to see. Without a doubt, I strongly believe, as do my colleagues, that to really effectuate change and put the system in the best way possible is to allow states' attorneys to be the ones in charge. You've given us that power and authority with the adult system, and you've seen we've made great strides in Baltimore City. Just give us the same power and authority to be the gatekeepers within the juvenile system so we understand what cases there are. DJS is still at the table. You know, right now, as prosecutors, elected officials by the citizens and residents of Baltimore City and the citizens throughout the state of Maryland, we don't have a seat at the table when it comes to juveniles and those initial charges.
There is something that we read about all the time. Someone is assaulted here, there, always getting assaulted. So a juvenile is arrested for assaulting someone. What it changes?
Second-degree assault, which is a misdemeanor. Does that juvenile have a history, have a record? What's going on with this juvenile in any way, shape, or fashion? If it's a juvenile with a history, then that juvenile will probably get a charging documentation, and that officer may ask that juvenile be detained depending on the severity of the assault. However, it's a juvenile with no history or anything like that, DJS would be the ones who receive that information, and my office may not ever know anything about this juvenile being charged with an assault. It's a misdemeanor.
So how does the Department of Juvenile Services balance holding juveniles accountable versus offering rehabilitative services?
Well, I think that's one you have to ask them that question. But from my understanding,
from their actions,
from
their past actions, how do you answer that?
Well, their past actions have clearly placed the juvenile and what's going on with the juvenile ahead of public safety. And that's one of the major issues and problems. You know, you have to remember, my job as a prosecutor, I'm about public safety. I'm about protecting the victims. I'm about protecting the citizens. So that's why, in so many instances, unfortunately, it seems like we're opposed, we're on opposite sides. So, you know, I think when you look at DJS, they're trying to figure out what's in the best interest of the child. I would ask that they also take public safety into the equation greatly as well, because the best interest of the child is making sure that we have a safe public so that that child and other children can live in a safe environment.
What standards of accountability, Mr. Bates, will the Department of Juvenile Services be held to under this new law, and how will you, for the public, measure their effectiveness?
Well, one, under this new law, there's a board that DJS, Department of Juvenile Services, they report to. So there will be an accountability board that will look at what they do day in and day out. But we'll also look at it because we'll also keep our own stats. We're going to make sure we understand how many young people came through, how many people were detained, what were their charges. And from there, we'll be able to have that conversation with whether it's the secretary, whether it's the governor or the leadership, because we'll be able to find out what's going on. And I'm sure when we have those types of cases that flare up, we will make sure that we are there to protect the rights and the safety of the residents of Baltimore City. And that's how we'll go ahead. We will sit down the same way we rang the alarm early on last year about the issues of juvenile. We've been ringing the alarm the same way. We're not planning to go anywhere. We're going to continue to ring the alarm. But we are a partner. Make no doubt about this. This is about collaboration. This is about partnership. DJS can't do it on its own, so hopefully they'll also look to us as prosecutors to be able to hold young people accountable. This isn't about throwing young people's lives away. This is about accountability and getting young people the rehabilitative services and programs they need as quickly as possible.
You know, you've made it clear during this conversation that you trust and have confidence in Governor Westmore. But do you trust, given the past circumstances and what continues to happen with juveniles, do you trust his Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Services, Vincent Schiraldi? Do you think he will behave any differently And there's no question he's made mistakes. There's most egregious mistakes that have caused people their lives, that have been harmed. No one can argue that. Because this conversation tonight is about how do we protect everyday citizens of Baltimore to make them feel safe and secure and not feel threatened by out-of-control youth. Do you trust his word? Do you think that he's going to enforce the letter of this law given his past history?
Well, I look at it like this. This must be a partnership with everybody. And for me to totally do my job the proper way to protect the residents of Baltimore City, I have to trust that it's the governor's selection, and the governor's had the conversation with Secretary Schiraldi about the law changing. I'm one who sits down and believes in second chances, and has there been abject failure? Without a doubt. However, I think we have all sounded the alarm that there must be a change. And right now, the change is going to be that law. If he does not, I will be the first one telling the governor and asking the governor, look, what can we do next? You've given him a chance, you've changed the law, you've given him the opportunity. We're here the ones suffering in the...
So you're saying something even deeper here. There is a petition to remove Schiraldi, have him step down, for the governor to fire him. You're saying now that this new law will become effective on Friday, November 1st, give Schiraldi another chance, despite the consequences of the past, and if he fails the governor, fire him, or he should step down.
I'm not saying give anybody a second chance. I'm saying the governor makes that choice. And if that's the governor's choice, then I recognize where we are.
Then what is the best choice going forward for the everyday citizens that must live with this? If you were the governor, what would you do?
I'm not the governor. I didn't get elected that. You know what I have to do? I have to work with whomever the governor has decided that needs to be in that position. And to be honest...
But what if this position, when it fails the governor, it fails the citizens of Baltimore?
Without a doubt, and the governor has to make that choice about what's next. What I have to do is focus on the law, focus on the changes, and focus what I can control. And what I can control is making sure that when those cases are referred to my office, that we are prepared to hold the young people accountable in that way, in that system. However, I was not elected for governor, and that is the governor's choice.
But people can take solace in the fact that you have a very good relationship with the governor, and there are things that you're willing to bring to his attention, especially when the safety of the people are at stake here, even if it places his Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Services in a light where he probably could be terminated in the future.
Without a doubt, I will continue. And like I said, the governor and I do have a good relationship. Yeah. And when I do see something that is concerning to me, I brought it to the governor before. I'll continue to bring it to the governor. And I do believe that the governor needs to understand what's going on. Look,
hold that point. We'll be back. Your voice, your future. We're honored to have Mr. Bates join us tonight. Don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Welcome back. The Honorable Ivan Bates has joining us, the Baltimore State Attorney. What happens to a juvenile in school now who's caught with a gun?
Well, the first thing that happens is that the school police in Baltimore City, now led by Jeff Shorter, they would go ahead and make the arrest and take the juvenile down to juvenile booking.
You know, better than that, walk us through the process. Okay. Walk us through. Help us understand it.
This is how the process works. Let's talk about a misdemeanor and a felony. So let's say well, actually, let's talk about a handgun. Handgun's a misdemeanor, and so basically it would work like this. That young person with that handgun in school, the police would come and grab them, and then they would take them to DJS, to the Juvenile Justice Center, which some people in Baltimore call baby booking. If it was after 3 o'clock, they'd have to take a telephone, make the call to DJS about what's going on. DJS would tell them to write the report. Based on the report, DJS would say, we're going to detain the young person or we're going to take them home. They could tell the police officer, take that young person home, write your reports. If that young person was detained, then we would have about 48 hours before DJS makes sure that young person goes in front of a judge, and the judge would make the determination whether or not to hold that young person or not hold that young person, to send them home on electronic detention or CDEM. We have two types of detention. Ankle bracelets. One's an ankle bracelet, we're checking your GPS monitoring, and one's we're just kind of telling you what to do. There's an ankle bracelet, but it's not in real time. And so that depends on the charge. One, if you're detained, you're going to be detained, you're not going home. Number two, if you go home, it could be on an ankle bracelet where it's GPS real time, or not real time, but it's an ankle bracelet. Or number three, the police could have been told to just send you home, and if you go home, then we're not going to charge you at all. Those are the three options potentially DJS has. Then DJS would get the reports from the police, decide what it says, make a decision whether or not they want to forward the cases, which are called paper referrals, to my office. Once my office gets the paper referral, under the old law, it was 25 days, and really it was taking about 60 days. Under the new law, it's going to be 15 business days. Once my office has those paper referral, we're going to take no more than 30 days. We're trying to do it within 15 days to reach out to the witnesses, the victims, put the case together, and put it in for what's called like an arraignment. And then by the time we have a court date, we go through the regular process that you see in the adult system. We would go ahead and let the child know what they're charged with. They would have a public defender. We'd set in a trial date, and then we would have to prove the case. And then that young person responded is what they're called, not a defendant. They would be either found fact sustained or not fact sustained. Let's say they were found fact sustained. They then would come back at a later time. There would be a report. Based on a report, we'd figure out what program that young person would need. Under the old law, if it was a misdemeanor, that handgun, then they would only have 6 months from the date of sentencing to be under supervised release. Under the new law, they'll have a year since sentencing to be under supervised release, and this would allow the young person to get the programming and that they do need.
You know, in what you just described, I mean, something that is just actually factual. 90% of the crime are committed by repeat offenders. I mean, very few of these kids. At what point do you realize that some of these kids cannot be rehabilitated, Mr. Bates, that you need to do the public a favor and just lock them up and just toss away the key for a few decades? Not years, but decades.
Well, look, I don't ever want to say our young people we can't.
But they can't. Some. I just said some.
No,
we're not saying the majority. We're just saying some.
No, I understand. But look, I believe in young people. I'm a father of an 8-year-old daughter. But what I need to understand is more, what's the background of this young person? What's going on with them? And yes, some young people need to sit down, especially depending on the charge, because we have to hold them accountable. But I also recognize my job is public safety. I am that last defense. You have the first responders, we are the last responders. So what does that look like? Within the system, what are the programs? One of the problems that I have, unfortunately, with the juvenile system is I don't necessarily think we have enough programs in place for young people to get the services that they necessarily need in Maryland. So if we don't have the programs in place for young people to get the services, has the system not in fact failed young people?
Why don't we have them?
Some of them were taken down, and I don't necessarily know in terms of how all the funding went beforehand. But that's what I've been told. We do not have all the programs. For instance, what I'm finding out with some people, if a young person tries to shoot and kill somebody, and let's say they fail, and their case is in the juvenile system, you may have that juvenile detained for maybe 9 months. 9 months. And so what type of services can you give that young person? And so that's some of the failures within the system that I'm seeing that we have here in Maryland.
You know, there is a delicate balance between DGS accountability and juvenile rehabilitation. How do you balance that tension where it works for everybody?
Well, you know, once again, my job is not necessarily that balance. My job is public safety. My job is making sure I'm the voice of the victims. But we also understand that young people need to have that support. You know, I'm a big believer of holding young people accountable the very first time.
How do you define holding them accountable?
Well, it could be different ways. That first time that young person's in that stolen car, I don't agree on sending them straight home to their parents. I don't agree to that. What I do agree, that first time that young person is in that car, let's place them on electronic home detention. But the other thing that we need to do is we need to be realist. There are two types of home detentions here that DJS has. They have the home detention that is an ankle bracelet. One is real time. For instance, a teenage child is in college over on the West Coast. I can look at my phone and figure out where she is at any moment, any time of the day. Why are we not doing that with the young people in the juvenile system? If they're on electronic home detention, they have another home detention, CDEM, that we're not able to do that. They may leave the area, but we can't necessarily figure out what's going on. We need to make sure every single child that's under the supervision of DJS that's on electronic home detention has real-time GPS monitoring. That's the first way we're going to hold them accountable. And then in holding them accountable, we're making sure that they understand if you're going to be home on electronic home detention, you must go to school. Baltimore City is almost a 30% truancy rate. That is absolutely astronomical. How are we going to help our young people if they're not going to school reading and writing? So this is a whole collaborative effort in terms of the entire system, whether it's the schools working, whether it's, you know, what's going on with DJS. Once we've done that, we've let this young person understand the first time being in a stolen car means you're going to be held accountable. That's now we've got this young person's attention. Now I feel they're in a position now to be rehabilitated to understand the programming that they need.
So let me interject this. What about juveniles facing severe charges? Where does their accountability end and rehabilitation begin, especially under the new guidelines?
Well, let's say a young person facing a charge of murder, severe consequences. That young person will be charged, depending on their age, they'll be charged, if especially it's first-degree murder, we're going to charge them with first-degree murder. And that young person will be in the adult system. And that is making sure we hold them accountable and responsible. You know, one of the things that I've kind of noticed recently is there's been a call or a movement to say any and all cases that are involving juveniles must and should start in the juvenile system. I believe that will be by far the worst thing that we could do, because then it takes away the opportunity to hold young people accountable and more importantly, to make sure that we're getting the victims the justice that they deserve and the victim's family the justice they deserve.
What are the true numbers on crime?
Well, in juvenile crime, well, you know, it's interesting you say that because, you know, there was a report that came out, the Sentencing Project has written a report.
You know, my paper, and I say my paper, the Baltimore Sun, so David and I own it, they have this in here, juvenile law sets to take effect. But they talk about this sentencing guideline.
Sentencing project. And so what really bothered me was the reporter who wrote that article reached out about...
Darcy Costello, our reporter.
Ms. Costello reached out about 3-4 weeks ago. And we explained to her that the numbers that the Sentencing Project said to say that juvenile crime is down, those are faulty, those are fake numbers. They were not actually all the numbers. We explained that to her. We spoke to Baltimore City Police Department where they received these numbers. BPD said the numbers that the Sentencing Project has is only for the young people detained. Remember, I just broke down the way the system works. So what about all the other young people that weren't detained? For instance, you know, we looked at the numbers. It was about last year, I think, 323 cases of young people that weren't detained that were sent to our office in 2023. Then you probably have almost another 200 cases where they told Baltimore City police officers to just take the young people home without charging them. They were still arrested. They were in police custody. The police attempted to arrest them. DJS turned them away. So if that's the case, there are at least 323 additional cases that the Sentencing Project doesn't talk about, and up to 500 cases. So when you look at that, those numbers are faulty. They're not the numbers you can believe in. And to be honest, it was very disappointing because we explained this to the reporter 3-4 weeks ago. We wrote her a lengthy email expressing this, but yet she still writes an article pushing that narrative. And that's very wrong, because that's the type of narrative that makes the residents of Baltimore City and other surrounding areas who are being victimized by crime so angry and feel so defeated. What we need to do is tell the truth, and let's work to find out a solution together.
Oh, certainly. We can always do better, and that certainly will do better with the Baltimore Sun. You know, are there any specific programs or partnerships in place to support the rehabilitation side of the Department of Juvenile Services responsibilities?
Well, I know one of the programs that Secretary Shirati likes to talk about a great deal is Thrive. We've seen some success, we've seen some failure, but look, I want to at least acknowledge that he's truly trying to do something. And so that's a program that, from all practical purposes, nothing is perfect, but you see him trying to do something very positive. But then I look at other programs such as ROCA. And you know, what ROCA does for young people with handguns has been phenomenal. We've referred a number of individuals on the adult system who are young with handguns. And so we're looking to see what's going on with young people and issues with crime. What you clearly understand is this: with young people, you need to hold them accountable at the very beginning, certain and swift consequences, but you need to have a program that's going to change their way of thinking. And when I look at programs of holding young people accountable, I look at ROCA. ROCA's changed the way young people are using their mind, young people are approaching issues, young people are approaching some of the conflicts that they have. And you know, I think if we really work together, we can work on programs to do that.
Hold that. Now, when we come back at the top of the hour, we're going to give the State Attorney a little breathing, because David Bramas is going to join us a little bit to talk about the Harbor Place, which is many people are excited about. The judge ruled it in his favor, so we get a chance to get a few thoughts on him and whether he's planning to revitalize and bring people back. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Let me welcome David Bramwell, the co-founder and manager partner of MCB Real Estate, to the conversation. You know, let me congratulate you. I'm sure you were very pleased with the judge's ruling, and it sort of takes me back to days when Ross and then Governor Schaefer decided a way to get people back to downtown Baltimore was to revitalize it. And now you have an opportunity, particularly you find out on Election Day if this passes, to really revitalize Baltimore and just bring back that vibe, bring back that feeling, that pride. What does that mean to you, and how do you plan to build and bring people back to this remarkable city?
So thanks for having me, and thanks for that question, because I think it's an important question. I think it's important that people understand that Harbor Place is not a panacea. Redeveloping Harbor Place is not going to fix every single problem we have in Baltimore, but we do believe the big, bold vision that we've set forth after a lot of community engagement and working with international architectural firms is an opportunity to reset the trajectory of downtown Baltimore, which, as you know, is facing an existential crisis that many cities throughout the country are facing post-COVID.
You know, what key trends are you observing in urban development, David, as you embark upon this new, this journey?
Yeah, I mean, that's also, I happen to be out here in Las Vegas at the Urban Land Institute, where people who work in the built environment throughout the world are here collectively exchanging ideas and talking about the future of the built environment. And the reality is what's happening in the most exciting developments around the world are mixing uses. So that's adding things like retail and multifamily and office to singular projects to create projects that are more walkable, more pedestrian friendly, lots of access from the street, things that really serve as catalysts for enlivening and activation. That's kind of what we talk about now all the time is how are we activating the site and how does the built environment encourage that?
And finally, the vote is on November 5th. What do you say to the naysayers and the people who don't understand the vision and how important this is to the revitalization of Baltimore, why they should support this measure next week?
Again, I'm glad you asked that because most of we've received overwhelming support for this project. We spent months and months and months in the biggest community engagement process we've certainly ever been involved in, and many other folks who saw it or participated talked about how we spent a lot of time not just talking to the immediate neighborhoods around Harbor Place, but to the entire city of Baltimore and indeed in the region, meeting with anyone who wanted to meet with us. In fact, we had signs on the sides of city buses inviting people to come and sit with us, share their ideas, their vision. And we took all those ideas and combined that with what's practical and what's executable to come up with what you've seen or what everybody has seen now. What people need to understand is that this is a very hard project. It took a long time to get from the community engagement process through the urban design process and approval from the planning board. Very long and public process. And this is our moment as citizens of Baltimore to make an investment in downtown and reset our trajectory, which right now, quite frankly, without major investment, it is a very, very scary trajectory with massive office vacancies, declining values, and we really need to rethink downtown Baltimore. So we're pretty excited that this project could be a catalyst for that, for bringing those things together and for a launching point for the next 50 to 100 years in Baltimore.
Well, David, we're certainly going to follow up, and we wish you well. And thank you for taking time from your conference in the city of Las Vegas to join us, and we look forward to having you back in the future.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Mr. State Attorney, how will the law address the challenges faced by families and communities in supporting these juvenile post-release?
The biggest thing that we look at with the law is the electronic home detention. And I think when you look at the home detention aspect, making sure that DJS reports any and all violations within 24 hours, that's one of the ways that we can try to use the law to support the community to make sure that the young people who are not supposed to be out there because they've already offended once are not back out there reoffending. But also allows us to make sure that the young people are doing what they're supposed to do so that we can put them back on track. At the end of the day, I speak to a lot of communities, and communities are very concerned, but they also recognize that these young people are their children, are their nieces, their nephews, their cousins, and they want the best for their children. But make no mistake, they also want their young people, their children, to be held accountable. And accountability is sometimes tough love. I think we have to understand as a community and society that just going on ahead and not giving tough love to our children isn't always helping them. They want to ensure that the young people receive the services that they need. However, if they continue to abuse that process over and over again, then they're asking that some of these young people then be detained.
You know, finally, how can the public and you measure what success looks like after the passage of this, when this bill becomes law on Friday, in the months and the years to come? And also, particularly in the media, how will they know this has been a game changer for them?
Well, I don't think we're going to be able to see it right away, to be honest. I think it's going to take a little bit of time. Because remember, you just don't snap your fingers and make change. When I ran for this office, I said it's going to take time for change. Change does take time. So I think one of the things we'll be able to measure this is to see how often the police ask that young people be detained, and is my office receiving those cases within 24 hours? That's something we can see rather quickly. Then we'll also be able to see, is my office receiving every single one of these felony cases within 15 days? And then we'll also be able to listen and see what's going on with electronic home detention with young people. That, to me, is the 3 ways that we can look at this law pretty quickly to see if they're making changes within the first month to 2 months. We get into 6, 7 months, we should not see the same kids over and over again coming in the system. We should be able, by that time, to figure out who are the young people that are consistently breaking the law and how are we able to hold them accountable. I look at the way we've been able to focus on gun offenders. We're not seeing the older gun offenders that we saw in January 2023. We're seeing younger gun offenders who have not been in the system but have decided they want to also now carry guns. That meant that the older gun offenders got the message. We need to make sure young people, all young people, get the message. We don't want mass incarceration. We don't want to incarcerate any of them. We want them to go to school, enjoy being a young person, but we having to be the gatekeepers of the system, we have a duty and responsibility as the gatekeepers of the system to make sure the system works, but parents have a duty and responsibility to be parents first and foremost.
Obviously, you have a lot of respect in this city. And, one of the things I enjoy about when we have you on is that you have one of the best professional staff. I mean, efficient, professional, Hassan Giordano and others, just a joy to work with professionals. And it reflects you and your leadership. Are Baltimore's best days ahead of them or behind them?
Oh, ahead without a doubt. We are up and coming. Our best days, without a doubt, are ahead of us.
And people really praying that when this law takes effect on Friday, that they see a difference in their fear, their livelihood, their safety. And like you said, it takes time. But man, their patience are running out.
I understand. Look, I'm the father of an 8-year-old little girl, and I recognize being a parent's a full-time job. But we also need parents out there to be parents for this law to work properly. Those of you trying, giving 100% effort, let us figure out what we need to do to get the resources to you. And for those of you that have thrown up your hands and decide, you don't want to be a parent, but I bet you when it's time to file that IRS tax break, you file then, we need you to be a parent because we're all on the same team together and we will make change together.
Ivan Bates, thank you so much for joining us. WBFL Fox 45, thank you for hosting us. Thank you, Baltimore Sun, for your live streaming. I'm Armstrong Williams. Got a few seconds to spare.